All right, my name is Adam Chernetsky. I am the HR, IT, and Health and Safety Manager for a heavy-duty truck dealership in Alberta. We have six dealerships. Majority, 70% of our staff are heavy-duty mechanics and parts people, so we mainly deal with the trades. I also teach at Mount Royal University, Human Resources, at University of Calgary, Human Resources, and I also teach in construction college on leadership and human resources as well. So that's a little bit of a background on me. I never wanted to do this. It was never of, yay, let me talk about pot and smoking and weed. I was sort of thrown into this partly because of my own curiosity, because I didn't have an opinion on it. And so now what ends up happening is when I see my friends, family, and coworkers, they're like, oh, I saw a program on TV about pot or cannabis, and I thought about you. It's like, that's not what I want. Right? But my journey started of really wanting to figure out where I stand on this position, because I had no idea. I knew this was coming. I knew as an HR professional that I would have to eventually deal with it. And to be honest with you, I still sit on the fence of how I feel about cannabis in the workplace. I'll tell you this, though, from a personal perspective, if I had to choose my addiction between alcohol, opiates, or cannabis, I would choose to be a cannabis addict. If for my own children, they, for whatever reason, the dice were thrown and I was told, you must pick an addiction for your child, I would also pick cannabis over alcohol and an opiate. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. I've tried to make this presentation as neutral as possible, showing you both the positive and negative, and pretty much my own journey going through this. So it's going to be cut into three pieces. One is a cannabis education part, just getting a little bit more information about cannabis and what I found that really lowered my level of anxiety about cannabis coming in. Next part is just preparing your workplace for it, and the third part is going to be a workshop portion of sort of discussing the real-life situations with cannabis in the workplace. So the first question I ever get asked is, when is it really coming? So we definitely know that it's coming fall of 2018, maybe. If it doesn't come on the fall of 2018, most definitely early 2019. And if that doesn't happen, fall of 2019. And if that doesn't happen, 2020, we should be pretty good. So we know that for sure. Okay. Like I said, we're going to break this up into three portions. What I would like you to do is, if you have a question, just categorize yourself of where that question is. Is it on cannabis? Then hold your question until the end of section 1. If it's about workplace-related cannabis, wait until section 2. And then it's a free-for-all on section 3. But I'd like to sort of hold off any kind of workplace cannabis questions until the second section. We're going to quickly go about the history, types, benefits, delivery method, tolerance, testing, and addiction, just to get a general idea on cannabis. Believe it or not, cannabis has been with us for tens of thousands of years. Archaeologists have found cannabis seeds dating back as far as 12,000 BC. And so we as a people have been using cannabis culturally and spiritually for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. There's even a stoned ape theory or hypothesis. It's not a theory yet. Hypothesis is when you have an idea but there hasn't been enough testing to actually become a theory, where they think that because of psychedelics, that's what exploded the brain capacity of hominids in a 12 million or in a 2 million span, where we doubled our brain size. And it's been shown that if you take a little bit of psychedelics, it can actually improve some cognitive function. And they're theorizing that this might be why our brain capacity expanded. That's an off to the side tangent. But the idea here is we've used medical cannabis and psychedelic cannabis for tens of thousands of years. And it wasn't until the 1900s where it actually became illegal. Oops. So what happened in the early 1800s was all of a sudden, just like we have now, we started to have an opioid epidemic. And due to the cultural clash, racial clash, and everything like that, opioids were legal, but they were seen as a detriment to society. And so lawmakers started to make the use of opioids illegal. And then they said it's illegal, but you can still use it for medical purposes and that sort of thing. And then cannabis kind of got intertwined in 1923 in the 20-year sort of fight against drugs, and it became illegal in 1923. So it's been illegal for about 100 years. And if you look at that from a generational perspective, it's been about 5 generations where we've seen this as an illegal negative substance. Prior to tens and thousands of years, it was completely acceptable for upper class, lower class, everyone to be using this just like you would Tylenol, NyQuil, smoking, alcohol. Even alcohol was banned for a very short time, and yet we don't have a negative connotation to it. And I feel that all of us are going to have to die as a generation in order for cannabis to lose its stigma. So even though it's going to have it's going to be, all right, it's legal now, it's going to take society a few generations to normalize that this is sort of an acceptable factor. So even though it's going to be legal, there's still going to be a sort of hush-hush. We don't talk about it publicly because you don't want to be associated with. And I even find that myself. People think that I'm a user just by me talking about the benefits of cannabis and that sort of thing. So I'm quite aware of the stigma there. So once it became illegal in 1923, it was very sort of off the radar. And in 1940, there was only about 2% of arrests were cannabis related. Now I'm using cannabis specifically because one of the recommendations is pot and marijuana is a slang. So just like we say alcohol in order to talk about beer and spirits and wine, we use cannabis to talk about the variations of different types of cannabis plants and marijuana and pot. So me talking about alcohol, I wouldn't be saying, oh, I'm going to talk about stubbies and I'm going to talk about, what's a slang for beer? Yeah, a 2-4. So, no one wants to bring a 2-4 into work. And that's the same thing as talking about pot and marijuana. So as HR professionals, it's now recommended, or as professionals, that when we refer to marijuana and pot, we should refer to it as its proper name, cannabis. And I digress again. So then all of a sudden, in the 1960s, there was a popularity rise of cannabis, and all of a sudden we went from 20 cases of arrests across Canada to a staggering 12,000, and it kept on increasing year over year over year. Then in 1972, the Royal Commission looked at cannabis and said, hey, there might be something with this plant. I think we have some medical benefits of it, but it was quickly squashed. And there hasn't been a lot of research done on cannabis and its medical impact because of the stigma and the fact that it's been an illegal plant for almost 100 years. So one of the positives there that's going to be coming out of it, once it becomes legalized, it's going to be a lot more accessible to researchers, because in order for a researcher to get access to an illegal plant was a lot of red tape. And so now, because it will become legalized, researchers will have a lot more access to that plant to start analyzing it, doing a lot more tests with it and that sort of thing. 1980s, cannabis use stabilized, peaked again into 1990s, and there was a critical case out in Saskatchewan where there was an epileptic who had severe seizures to dozens and dozens of seizures per day, and the only thing that would control his seizures was cannabis. So they have tried every single drug. Nothing worked as effectively as cannabis, and went all the way to the Supreme Court system that was his human right to have access to something that would allow him to have some kind of life, which then slowly turned into the Medical Access, the MMAR Act, and which allowed you to have access to medical marijuana that you would have to grow, which then got pushed back and saying, well, I don't want to grow it because I don't know how many of you are gardeners here, but it's tough to keep something alive, okay? And one of the things that we hear about is like you can grow your own cannabis, and people are going to be like, oh, everyone's going to grow their own cannabis in their homes. You can make your own beer and you can make your own wine, but we don't do it. Why? Because it's hard, it's time consuming. And so it's one of these counter arguments that I have when people are going, everyone's going to be growing it. No, they're not. Not everyone has a garden. If they have a garden bed, they have it for one season, and then it becomes a weedy garden because it's very difficult to grow cannabis. You have to have a passion for it. Believe it or not, this is not the first time that the Liberal government has tried to push through the legalization of cannabis. They failed in 2003. The Conservative Party doubled down after the legalization was brought up, and they increased the sentences for dealers. Then in 2013, there was an act that allowed third-party producers to produce medical marijuana for consumption. And then 2015, that's when the Liberals said, hey, this is our platform, we're going to legalize it, and it's going to come they made the announcement 2017. They said it's going to happen 2018. It's not going to happen in 2018. Here's the problem. Everyone's afraid, and I agree to it. The philosophy is going to be, let's open a little bit of a floodgate and slowly start opening it as we're learning, rather than let's just open it, see what happens, and then start closing once we learn it. And I think that's a much better effect. As we all know, those of you who are in HR, it's a lot easier to give benefits than it is to take away, right? So it's a lot easier to incrementally start opening up the laws and be a lot more flexible with the regulations as we're learning this. And a really good example is Colorado. They're not burning. There's no anarchy. There's no, termination or Terminator for doomsday happening. Society is still functioning. We're getting a lot of data from it. So as it becomes legalized, it will slowly become more. It's going to be heavily regulated at the beginning, and then as interested parties go in, it's going to open up the floodgates. The Alberta government did a study recently about the legal use, and it was on the phone. So what they have found out is that 55% of Albertans have tried cannabis at some point in their lives. 20% have tried it in the last year, and I argue continue to try it continuously. And then 7% will try it once it becomes legalized. And in my personal estimation, I think it's going to be one of those things that you'll try it, okay, it's not going to turn you into an addict. Just like when you try alcohol or anything along those lines, you'll either like it or not like it, but the probability of you becoming hooked on your first poke is very, very unlikely. The Alberta government has also created a framework for you to sort of give you a general idea of what's going on. So if you just go into, and this is on the slide deck that you are provided, so don't worry about writing it down. Please don't write anything that is on the slides because you're doubling up your work if there's anything in addition to. But check that out. They also made a fantastic video. They also made a fantastic video about their strategy and their rollout. And so check that out. And there's been an update to this video as well. And so you were sent links. How many of you actually watched all the videos? Okay. So less than half of you. All right. So this is what the video roughly says. It's going to be there's going to be provincial oversight, and there's going to be licensed growers, and you're going to have to go through the provincial government in order to get permission to become a licensed grower that's going to be federally regulated by you. Once you do that, you will then be able to sell it at individual cannabis retail stores. There's going to be regulations of how apart a cannabis store can be from an alcohol store, because what they don't want is, for whatever reason, for alcohol to be sold with cannabis. And what they don't want is then a liquor store then just opening up a cannabis store next door, and you're just literally by a partition or by a wall and that sort of thing. The other thing that is interesting is people think that opening up a cannabis store is easy. It is estimated that it costs about $500,000 in order for you to go through the training, the regulations, to hire the proper staff, to prepare your facility, to code and everything like that. It's estimated that it's going to cost about $500,000 of investment per store. And for you and me to be able to just, you know what, I think I'm going to get into the cannabis business, there's already a barrier to that. And what's happening and what I see is all the producers of the medical marijuana, since they're already gone through that system, are seizing it on the opportunity to be able to do it now commercially. And this is a big concern for medical marijuana users, because all of a sudden there's a small percentage of consumers, and now the door's been open to, instead of producing for 5% of the population, you are now producing for 100% of the population. And they're afraid that all of a sudden the focus is going to shift away from the medical marijuana into the commercial marijuana. And I don't think they're wrong to be concerned about that. The producer's saying, no, our primary is going still to be medical cannabis, but we have this market that we have an opportunity to grow into. Online sales are going to be illegal in Alberta, so you won't be, but there are places where you can go online and with ID and a credit card, you can purchase edibles or cannabis and have it delivered to your home. However, when it's delivered to your home and it's not legalized in the home that you're being delivered, chances are you might be arrested because it's an illegal drug. But it's definitely the government saying once cannabis becomes legalized, it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to buy it online. You will have to physically go to a store to be able to buy it. Because with medical cannabis, you are able to get, I believe you are able to get it delivered to your home. They're talking about cannabis cafes and lounges. Initially, this was not supposed to be rolled out along with the legalization as a whole, but just recently, and it's going to be a city per city bylaw, it's going to be legalized, but you can't smoke it anywhere other than your home. And if you are renting your place and your landlord, just like they have the right to say you can't smoke cigarettes in the home, they have the right to say you can't smoke cannabis in the home. Where are they supposed to do it? So they can't go to a public place and smoke it. They can't smoke it at home. So this is, again, one of these quagmires of like, okay, we're making it legalized, but you can't smoke it anywhere. And so now they're trying to figure out, okay, let's try to figure out where they can smoke it. You are going to be allowed to have 30 grams on you, and 30 grams is roughly about 2 packs of cigarettes. Okay, so 2 packs of cigarettes, and that's a lot, right? So, and of course, you have to be 18 years old. The workplace is a big one that everyone is kind of concerned about and freaking out. And doing this research, I spoke to a number of ex-RCMP officers, and this is what they said. Your employees are already doing it. Those are the doing it. They're just not talking about it. Right? So you have roughly 20% of your staff, give or take, that are recreational users. Now, that might be on a regular basis, or that might be once a year, or whatever it may be. But this is already happening. Those that are using it are going to be using it regardless whether it's legal or not. And it's not an issue now. Right? What we're concerned about is that uneducated employee coming into work, token, going, hey, it's legal, I can do this. And just like you can't come into work chugging a beer, you can't come into work lighting a cigarette or smoking at work because you become impaired. The reason why smoking is allowed at work is because impairment from nicotine only lasts about 5 to 15 minutes. That's it. So if you are a new smoker, and those of you who have ever remembered the first time ever smoking, you are gonzo and impaired for like 15 minutes, and then it quickly goes away. And then as you become a smoker, that hit, it gets lesser and lesser to like a minute, 30 seconds, or the length of the cigarette that you're having. Right? That's, in my opinion, like if nicotine had a lasting effect of 2 to 3 hours of impairment, it wouldn't be allowed, it wouldn't be legal. But because the impairment is so small, in my personal opinion, I think that's why it is allowed to be in the workplace. This thing's not cooperating with. So the issues that come up here, as I kind of spoke about, is housing. So landlords can say, nope, you can't smoke into it. But here's the other thing. My wife's a realtor. And now what they are required to discuss with their potential clients is they will have to ask, has cannabis been grown in this home? Right? Because, here's the thing, you are only going to be allowed 4 plants in the home. Right? And I think the question is, has there been more than 4 plants grown in this home at any one time? Because if it's more, then it's technically a grow-up. And the reason why is if you have 20, 30, 40 plants being grown at your home, you have the potential because of mold and damage to the home and things like that. So now, if the realtor says, have you grown more than 4 plants in the home? And the seller says no, and they have lied, and you purchase the home, and now you find out that this person was growing like 30, 40 plants, and they lied, there's a big legal repercussion to the seller because they lied in bad faith about their home. And it's one of these things that before was just never discussed and things like that. And now the realtors are going to have to be very meticulous about what kind of condition and home. And one of your future requirements is I would like to see homes that no cannabis was smoked in. Right? And that might limit the amount of homes that you'll be interested in and that sort of thing. So it's one of these, again, unforeseens that people just didn't think about now that it's sort of spilling over into another market, which is real estate. Driving is a big factor. Here's the problem. We still don't have any form of reliable testing on impairment other than the human brain and eyes of the police officer thinking that you are impaired or not. We don't have a reliable breathalyzer to say, yep, you have X amount of THC in the body, and I think that you're impaired. And so we are told that this device is coming, but when it's going to be out there is unknown, and the police RCMP are scrambling to get trained on that. Public consumption in the parks and everything like that is not going to be allowed. 4 homes per household. You are not allowed to grow cannabis outside your home. And the reason for that is there's nothing preventing kids from hopping your fence, picking your cannabis plants and stuff like that, and not realizing why they're not high because they picked the plant when it hasn't been ready to be picked and things like that. But if they YouTubed it, they would have known when to harvest the plant. So 30 grams, 4 per household, 18 plus, regulated places, regulated stores, and we're still going to have to establish impaired driving and everything like that. Right now, the only reliable test is a blood test, and this is now coming up. So theoretically, what can occur now is you get pulled over. The person thinks that you're impaired on cannabis or whatever it may be. You're going to have the right to request a blood test. Now, depending on how long it will take that police officer to dispatch somebody to be able, or to send you somewhere to withdraw blood, especially if it's like at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m., it might be hours before the fact that you will be able to draw blood. Now, the counter argument is, well, then we can work backwards and see how impaired you were from the moment of the hours that occurred. But the counter argument to that is each person's metabolic system processes drugs differently. So you can't tell me how impaired I was 6 hours ago based on the information that you can argue it, but this is where that quagmire is, that with every argument there's a counter argument and a what if and it depends and things like that along the line. The reason why cannabis is so interesting, and we only found this out about 30 years ago, is we have receptors, CB1 and CB2, naturally in our bodies, that they're cannabinoids that are produced in the cannabis plant that affect our bodies in both a positive and negative way. And so these receptors are naturally in our bodies, and they're attached to our nervous system, our immune system, our neurological systems. They are all over our bodies. And cannabis has these cannabinoids that interact with these receptors and stimulate the nervous system, neurological system, immune system. There's 2 types of cannabis plants and a swack of hybrids. These are the 2 most common types of plants, and then there's literally hundreds of hybrids. Just like there's lots of different types of beers that you can have different types of cannabis depending on the hybrid of it. But the 2 pure strains are sativa and indica. So if you have ever, and I'm not judging, tried cannabis and became sleepy and makes you drowsy, you've had indica. Now you know. Okay? And so what indica does, it puts you in that deep relaxation. People use it as a sleep aid, pain relief, to stimulate appetite. So people who are going through anxiety and stress are not eating. Well, if they take this stuff, they get the munchies and they start eating, right? The sativa is a lot more for the daytime. It's a euphoric, like you are on caffeine all the time. And alertness, uplifting, euphoric, it actually, unfortunately, can stimulate creativity. And some artists or graphic designers, things like that, will take this when they have to work on a project to be more creative. And I'll let you decide on how you feel about that. So this is why cannabis is such an interesting drug, because it interacts with our bodies, and we have these natural receptors in our bodies that the plant naturally interacts with. So this is a cannabis plant. You can take this and make a smoothie with it. Right now, you wouldn't have any effects whatsoever, but you would get the fiber, the vitamins, and everything like that. So you can still grow cannabis, and if you don't harvest it at the right time, you're not going to have any effects on it because it's not ready to be plucked. When it's ready to be harvested, if you ever just Google cannabis harvest, you'll see that all of a sudden the cannabis plant turns from this deep green into this sort of frosty plant. And what's happening is these trichomes are growing on the cannabis plant. And this is where the THC and CBD and all these cannabinoids are being produced. So they're not actually being produced in the leafy plant. They're being produced in these sort of crystals. And these are the cannabinoids factories that are producing these things that interact with our body. This is why if somebody jumps the fence and just picks this kind of plant and rolls it up and dries it, they're just going to have a terrible time with it, and it needs to be harvested. Now, the other thing is, just like fruit goes bad, you can have a delicious banana, or you can have an ugly, brown, soggy banana. Same thing with cannabis. If you don't do it at the right time, you can also, what's the word I'm looking, over-ripen, but that's not the word. But you won't have the same effect, or you'll have negative effects because you're pretty much eating rotten fruit because it wasn't harvested at the right time. So the two main components in the trichomes, the ones that we've studied the most, are THC and CBD. These have really complicated scientific names that I'm not going to try to pronounce, so we're just going to stay with THC and CBD. THC is the psychoactive drug that makes you high. Okay? So it has been shown, and there's been enough documentation that hands down that THC helps with pain relief. Okay? And it has been shown that if you are taking opioids for pain relief and you switch to cannabis, it has a better effect of managing your pain relief without the negative effects of opioids. What is now happening as well is they are taking opioid addicts, and to wean them off the opioids, they are giving them cannabis, and it's being quite successful. And this is why, unfortunately, I would choose to have myself and my children addicted to cannabis than opioids, because the negative effects are so much lesser in cannabis than they are on opioids or having an alcohol addiction problem. So these are the things that medically has been shown that it helps with. So anti-nausea, appetite stimulant, sleep aid, post-traumatic stress disorders, and that sort of thing. Now, this is not a wonder drug, because if you have mental issues, this can also worsen your mental issues. So it's not like a drug for all that this will, because it's so, your body chemistry is so individual that just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for another person. Statistically speaking, chances are it will work for the majority of you, but some of you will have negative effect solely to your biochemistry. CBD is the medical marijuana component. Okay, so the THC is more of the psychedelic, and the CBD is a lot more of the medical portion of it, and it has no psychoactive elements. So with CBD, you are able to then help with help epileptics, anti-nausea, anti-inflammatory, anti-anxiety, and that sort of thing. The street drugs that are the drugs that are on the street now have been specifically bred for high THC because that's what the client wants. Okay? The cannabis plants that your parents or grandparents took in the 1960s, or some of you, I'm not going to assume your ages, was a lot lesser than what we have today, because the drug dealers or the producers specifically have increased the THC through hybriding plants and that sort of thing. And what cannabis, medical cannabis has done is has switched over that CBD cannabinoid so that it has more of the medical properties in the plant. The problem is you can never get rid of THC. There's always a small amount of trace. There's no such thing as a pure CBD plant. I'm sure maybe at some point they will be able to produce that, but even the medical industry cannot produce a plant that is less than 2.5%. It sounds about right, but I might be wrong. 2.5% THC. Now, as an anecdote, the medical community has gone out to its users and have asked, at what point do you not experience psychoactive effects from THC? And it's been around less than 1%. So if they take medical cannabis with less than 1% THC, they don't have the psycho effects of THC. There's no research on this. This is an anecdotal. They reached out and kind of asked all their patients and that sort of thing, and they found that's trending. From an HR perspective, my recommendation is you can ask the level of THC in their medical prescription just to gauge of what level of impairment that might be. And just to give you, I wouldn't take that as I went to the seminar, they said less than 1%, this is my legal disclaimer. But at least you have a general idea of if it has 3 or 4 or 5%, that person is impaired. If it's less than the 1%, that person is functional as a general statistic that they are able to be on medical cannabis without being impaired. And the stigma is as soon as they're on medical cannabis, they're like, they're coming in to work impaired. Not necessarily. And the other thing that you might be able to do is request from the doctor saying, is it possible for them to take cannabis with less than 1% THC? Why do they have to take this amount of strain? And that's your right as an employer, right? Now, if the doctors, you don't want to, I went to this seminar, I think this is a better prescription. You're not a medical practitioner, but at least you can have some kind of pushback and ask questions, and you're just a little bit more educated at this point, rather than just putting it all in one basket, being able to separate THC and CBD and medical marijuana from recreational use. Enough research has been done that medical cannabis does treat insomnia, pain, inflammatory seizures, ADHD, epilepsy, Crohn's, Parkinson's, cancer, and arthritis. Now, it's not a cure, but it helps manage the symptoms a lot more, right? It has also been able to show that it can shrink some cancer tumors, but it doesn't kill or eliminate. It's a management tool. And so what ends up happening, the counter argument is that it's not a miracle drug, but it helps at least manage some of the diseases out there better than the pharmaceuticals that are out there. Why can't we use it? The other thing that's going to occur is with the retailers, you will be able to sort of choose your THC and CBD levels to a certain degree. And so you can go in and look at sort of the menu. And from my understanding, they will be required to post the THC levels at least. I'm not sure about the CBD. And you just understanding the percentages in there will give you a better idea of how much of an effect that might have on your brain. From a medical perspective, and I've spoken with some benefit companies. The use of cannabis can be anywhere in the tens to $15,000s of dollars per year. Some companies have chosen to have a cap, and that cap is anywhere between $1,500 to $6,000. But if you're taking medical prescription cannabis, it can be in the tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what it is. It's a very expensive product. The positive thing from the legalization, because it might be more acceptable and because of competition, now that prices might be lowered. But there is a concern now that what will happen to these medical patients is they will go to the commercial side because it might be cheaper, but they're not getting the true medical benefits of that. Yeah.
So you say tens of thousands of dollars, and that's a lot of money. But really, in relation to how much pharmaceuticals cost, it actually sounds like it would be a whole lot cheaper alternative, especially when you're looking at drugs for MS or Parkinson's or things like that that cost upwards of $50,000-$60,000 every couple of months. So would it not be more on the beneficial side? Like it seems that it's presented as being expensive, but to me that actually sounds a whole lot cheaper.
You're a very forward thinker, right? And so you are not wrong. The point I was trying to make is it's not a cheap alternative, right? So it's not a let's move you away from opioids into cannabis because it's a cheaper alternative. They're equivalent, if not more expensive, because it's such a small niche market compared to an opioid production. Okay, so I apologize if I framed it in a way that this is an expensive thing compared to other pharmaceuticals. In my opinion, it's equivalent. And what's happening with places like the big providers and companies, it's on a case-by-case level. So there's very few. I think Manulife was the only one that publicly has made it to their employees that we will provide medical cannabis. The reason why medical cannabis isn't a prescription right now, it doesn't have the DIN, for it to be a prescription, and so that's why companies are, it doesn't have the DIN, we're not doing it. But any employee that has taken the time and effort to challenge both the employer and the benefit provider has won. And so but everyone is kind of just quietly going, we'll take it on a case by case. We don't want to open up the floodgates, and everyone's just being a little bit cautious. So with the endo system about the receptors and the cannabinoids in your body and how it reacts, I highly recommend you watching this YouTube video. It'll definitely explain it much better than I will. We're going to have a supply and demand problem. And the reason for that is that right now we can currently only produce about 100,000 tons of cannabis. The plant that is the world's biggest plant that's being built in Edmonton, and it's the world's biggest producer, can only produce 100,000 tons. That facility can only produce 100,000 tons. It is estimated once it becomes legalized, we're going to need 500,000 tons of cannabis. So we're going to have a supply problem. Per year. We're going to have a supply problem. They're estimating, this is from Dalhousie University, they're estimating that until about 2020, 2021, we're going to have a supply problem until the industries can catch up to the demand. This is why medical patients are concerned about their level of medical cannabis isn't disrupted. And again, the provider is saying, no, we'll still focus, we'll just build up these facilities. There's about 200,000 medical users of cannabis, which is about 5% of the Canadian population. It is estimated it'll be 500,000 by date 2021. There's currently 22% of recreational users in Canada, and oddly enough, 20% in Alberta. And it's estimated it'll jump up to about 40%, and this is from Deloitte, that after legalization, about 40%. Now, what constitutes a user is varied in definitions. Is that once a year? Is that a couple times a year and that sort of thing? But moving forward, it goes along with 55% of Albertans have used it at some point. It's very close to that 40% that are going to be using it. The food industry is very interested in it because it's just another ingredient now. Would you like a cannabis smoothie? Would you like just like you have a little bit of a wine with your dinner? Would you like a little bit of a cannabis smoothie and get a little buzz with dinner as well? However, that's not. It's coming, and they're thinking about 2023, 25. Once it's going to be established into restaurants, restaurants will not be able to provide cannabis products or edibles, and edibles will not be legalized in 2018. and maybe 2019, 2020, 2021, but they're not legalizing edibles yet. Just as a perspective, 80% of Albertans use alcohol. 80% of Canadians use alcohol. So that's from a couple drinks to being a heavy addict and user. 10% use it to the point of being harmful to themselves, which means they break a leg, fall down the stairs, sprain an ankle, cause injury to somebody else because of their alcohol consumption, and 15% that their kidneys are failing, hearts are failing, that sort of thing, that it has negative effect on it. So, 40% to 80% of a drug that we know is harmful to your health, and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. Delivery methods. So there's various ways of delivery methods. So smoking is one. Edibles. So that's the brownies and cookies, and this is where restaurants are very interested. Would you like Parmesan or would you like cannabis with your spaghetti? Oils. And these ones, they're like concentrates, and you can put it under your tongue and you'll get a much more intense. And lotions, but you can't like rub your head and get high on it, but it's for like, just like you have sea salt and mud salt kind of beauty products, you can have cannabis products as well. I was very interested, and edibles falls under pills as well. Okay, so we're going to go with pills for this example, but I was curious. So I reached out to a medical facility of cannabis, and I said, what percentage of your medical patients buy pills versus smoking? So how many of you think that pill usage is more than 50%? That they use 60%? Less? So you're smarter than I am, because 80% of medical users use smoking as a method of delivery. And I figured it would be pills, right? But because of the instant delivery method of smoking, and because it's much cheaper than pills, that smoking is much more a common usage than is edibles. So if you smoke it, onset can take anywhere between 5 minutes. At 15 minutes, you're peaking, but your impairment is 3 to 4 hours. So although it is the most immediate, it has the least amount of duration of impairment. And again, it's 3 to 4 hours, whereas cigarette, the peak time is about a minute or to 5. After 15 minutes, you're done, right? And that's if you're a brand new smoker. With edibles, about an hour and a half. Peak time takes about 2 to 3 hours, and impairment is about 6 to 8 hours, so much more. And people have asked me why. You smoke it, goes straight into your bloodstream. You eat it, it goes straight into your gut and goes through, and then goes through your entire body. Oh, I forgot this one. There's even suppositories, right? And so very similar to the concentrated oils that you put under, because it's a concentrate and goes through your system first, not through your lungs. It's very similar to the edibles. Yeah. Yes, correct. So that's a very excellent point. So with chronic individuals, the more you use it, of course, with anything, the more your body gets accustomed to it, the quicker the effects are. You can still, the impairment level is still there, but it's at a less so. Just like you can have a functional alcoholic, right? So a person can chug a bottle of vodka and go into work and everything is fine. The same thing can happen with a cannabis user. Do you want that question repeated? So, okay. Anything else? So just because it is so intertwined with our biochemistry, we have no samples today, I apologize, but if we all took, let's say, a cookie or a piece of cannabis or a pill and ate it, because of our individual chemistry, we would all have different levels of effects. And my mother-in-law is a medical professional, and she went on a conference in Amsterdam, and she had 4 colleagues that went out for dinner. She didn't go out for dinner. She was very clear on that. She was talking about her colleagues, not her. So I just want to make that clear. And her 4 colleagues realized they were in Amsterdam and they have never tried cannabis. And so they all decided to try it for medical research. And they took each quarter piece from the same thing. One felt nothing, one felt something, one had the best time of their life, and one went into psychosis. Right? And these are just regular individuals, and this is why with your individual biochemistry, and that person with psychosis says that that was the worst thing ever, they will never try it again. Like, they never want to experience that again. So it's very individualized depending on your biochemistry. Like I said, testing is not there. We can do saliva swaps, but cannabis can last in the system anywhere from 7 to 14 weeks. You can, pluck hairs and all that kind of stuff. But you put in a suppository, you're passing your saliva test, right? And so it's one of those things that blood and urine are still there, but it's just not as, it's a lot more intrusive. There's cognitive tests that are coming out right now on tablets, where you can have a person do a cognitive test and can show how impaired they are. But guess what? Some people do better on the cognitive test high. So it's like here you go, and it's like, oh my God, you're way better, right? Go ahead, go back to work. So it's one of these things, we're still figuring this out. There's definitely long-term and short-term effects. This is not a wonder drug or anything like that. Memory is a big one, both on long-term and short-term. With chronic users, as they age, they find that if they were a chronic user in their youth or in their 20s and even 30s, they're finding that their memory loss and their ability to remember is drastically reduced. And it has been shown that if you introduce cannabis to youth between the ages of, call it 12 to 25, your brain is still developing until the age of 25, 26. So you are doing some damage. So it's not like 26, go at it. But the idea here is you are doing a lot more damage in your youth to your brain development using cannabis than you are at a later age. So those of you who have never tried it, you're okay. Come, 2019, you're not going to be as devastating. But both of them has psychosis as a side effect. And what psychosis is, you see and hear things that are not there. The problem is that if you already have mental issues, this makes it a lot worse. So even though it can help with some mental issues, it can definitely worsen others. This is why this is this quagmire on the individual level, that sometimes it will help others and sometimes it will make things worse. I highly recommend that video for a quick explanation of psychosis.
If all the talk is about the developing brain and the impacts that it can have on the developing brain, why then is the legal age still going to be 18? Or is it the same with alcohol? They say alcohol, so why not push it to 25 then?
I don't have the answer to that, but alcohol also has effects on the developing brain. It's not just cannabis. Any drug has breast milk, for crying out loud. You can argue has effects on the developing brain, whether you use formula or not. I don't want to get into this debate right now. Yeah, but there's as anything that develops, if you're entering an outside factor into it, is going to have an effect. Right? There's no super drug. Oh, let's feed this thing or put it into this child, and it's going to make them a super child. It's not there yet. But anything that you introduce into a developing body is going to have effects to it, both negative and positive, but mostly negative. Addiction. out of all the common drugs, cannabis is the least addictive. However, if cannabis is introduced to youth, 12 to call it 17 or around that number, that doubles their probability of addiction. However, most alcohol addicts were introduced to alcohol as a youth, right? So, in my opinion, it has the similar effects of addiction as alcohol. So, those of you who drink and don't think you're addicted, those are going to be this, in my personal sort of analogy, that's going to be the similar effects of cannabis. We wouldn't, those of you who are recreational drinkers, that you might have a couple a week and you're like, I'm not addicted. That same addiction rate applies between cannabis and alcohol. So lastly, before we go for a break, so research has been done that if you want to protect your youth, you want to build meaningful relationships with your children, which means don't stick them in front of iPads as a babysitter. However, some of us grew up as TVs as our babysitters, and we turned out just fine. We were also told that we're going to lose our vision to TVs, and yet we're still okay. Strong community involvement. And this is, I used to work in Korea for 6 years, and Korea has a very low crime rate. But the reason why they have a low crime rate is they keep their kids extremely busy. Like I had 5, 6, and 7-year-olds who went like to kindergarten, then to music class, then to taekwondo class, then to art class, and they got home at like 6 or 7. They were exhausted, falling into bed, and then waking up and doing it all over again. And so what addiction has found is when people have no connection to their families, to the community, to their surroundings, they're looking for something to do or for something to connect with. And that's what causes, it's not just a chemical addiction, it's a social problem as well, where people are using drugs to escape or to find what they're lacking in their meaningful relationships. So education and conversation, developing their interests. So it has been shown that if you put them in team sports or in kind of sports and have them do something, the probability of them using drugs lessens. However, just an offside, if you put them into team sports, it has been shown that their use of alcohol increases as they're getting into that 16, 17, 18. So here's the thing, no matter what you do, you're going to mess up your kids. Just try to have a good relationship with them, right? Is that what you guys were talking about? Yeah. Yeah. Team sport. Yeah. It's a team event, right? But here's the thing. I would rather try it and be in a group of positive kids, because there's always going to be negative kids, right? But at least have, and the idea here is keep them active, keep them engaged, keep them busy, and chances of them falling into the bad crowds lessen, then the probability of them turning out okay. They're going to be turning out okay. So we're going to go into our first break. We're going to go into 10 minutes. Those of you on live streaming, we're going to be back at 10:15-ish. What's the... Yep, 10:15 on the button. Here, those of you who have never taken a course with me, this is what I ask you to do. You cannot sit in your seats. Okay? Get up, leave. Don't go that way because you'll never come back. Take a quick walk around, stretch your legs, whatever it may be. But for at least 5 minutes, do not sit because your brain needs to reboot. And if you stay there, the next hour is going to be brutal. If you leave for at least 5 minutes, the next hour is going to just whiz on by. So our 2018 Christmas parties might get a little bit more interesting. I am sure that there's going to be an employee coming in and toking if it becomes legalized. My prediction is it's not going to be ready in the fall of 2018. I'm shooting for 2019. That something actually will be happening. I'm sure there will be some stumbling block come fall of 2018 and that sort of thing. So maybe your Christmas parties will be avoided this year, but in 2019, eventually we'll have to deal with it. One of the things that you need to do or are already doing is driver impairment and providing the support for that. So if you're providing alcohol at your Christmas parties, one of the ways to mitigate any wrongful or being due diligent is providing taxi rides home or providing alternative places home, so that if somebody gets into an accident, you can say we provided a taxi home that they chose not to use it. Or you can just say you are not allowed to use cannabis on the premise of your events and functions. Now, some people are going to go, whoa, 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 hey, this is now a legal thing. You can't tell me that I can't do it. Sure you can. You can go into an event and say, we're only going to serve beer, no hard alcohol. Or we're only going to provide one glass of wine with your meal, or that sort of thing. You can, just because it is legal doesn't mean that they can use it anywhere and everywhere that they want. And specifically, whatever function that you're having, chances are there's going to be a ban that you can't smoke it publicly or that sort of thing. So there's no place that they're going to be able to smoke and that sort of thing. So just think a little bit ahead of how you want to deal with your Christmas parties or your company events, and you can ban cannabis from being able to be brought on or used during company events. There's no law says that you can't, just like you can have a social club event and go to a bowling alley and say employees aren't allowed to drink or buy any alcohol during a company social event. So don't be afraid. There's a lot of fear on this, and just don't be afraid to put restrictions on it. The problem is, what are you going to do when somebody doesn't listen? So cannabis in the workplace is quite easy, just like alcohol in the workplace. You literally, in order to update your drug and alcohol policy, you're going to put drugs, alcohol, and cannabis. And you've just updated your policy. Okay? Now, there's some recommendations that you should have a distinction between illegal drugs and legal drugs, legal prescriptions also, and illegal prescriptions. And so what an illegal prescription is somebody taking opioids, a prescription of opioids from somebody else, and they don't have a prescription for it. That's an illegitimate use of a prescription drug, right? So somebody says, I'm on opioids, show me a prescription. You can't provide a prescription, even though it's a legal prescription that you can get. You don't have access to it, and you're using somebody else's prescription. So some people recommend breaking up those four. So legal, illegal, legitimate, I'm missing the term here, but a prescription, and then a non-authorized prescription, and that sort of thing, and you can use it that way. So the first question is it medical? And if the answer is no, it's discipline. And it's up to the employee to disclose whether they have an addiction or not. And so, do you have an addiction? No. Are you sure? Yes. If you do have an addiction, we are able to help you, and we will accommodate you. We will provide an EPA and that sort of thing to help you beat your addiction. Do you have an addiction problem? No. If you tell us that you have an addiction problem, we will not discipline you this time, but we will provide you with help in order to help you with your addiction. Do you have an addiction? No. Discipline. You've given them enough opportunity. They said, no, I'm a recreational user, that sort of thing. Sorry, did a dumb thing. You're going to use, just like somebody coming in impaired into work with alcohol. There's no medical benefits to alcohol. So it's only an addiction if somebody can't stop drinking. Where it makes it a issue is that cannabis has that medical property of it, and people can be using it as a prescription. If the answer is yes, then it's accommodation, right? So yes, I have an addiction, yes, it is medical. Well, now what you can do is you can ask, okay, please provide me a note or an authorization to use. Now, I have to be careful on this, but an authorization to use is not a prescription. Okay? So if they have just an authorization to use, that is not enough for them to go, here's my prescription. That's just your doctor saying, yeah, you should use this. It's not an actual prescription. So you don't have to accommodate an authorization to use, but you do have to do your due diligence to follow up and say, we need then a doctor's note or an actual prescription that you need this for medical purposes and that this isn't just a choice for you to be using this. Now, remember also that due diligence of that THC level, because just because they are using medical cannabis doesn't necessarily mean that they are impaired or a danger to it, depending on that situation. If there's, the next question is, if there's a dependency and the answer is no, then it's discipline, and if the answer is yes, it's accommodation. It's really that simple, and I really wish it was simpler, but then it becomes, well, it depends on all the circumstances. And the courts have been very clear that you cannot broad brush with one single policy without doing your due diligence, investigating, asking the right questions. Companies who just jump the gun, make a decision without actually doing their due diligence of investigating the reasons, giving the proper amount of time for that person to provide the documentation, to provide the prescriptions, with working with an employee, always lose in court, not because they were wrong, but because they didn't try, right? So even though you might be right, and you know you're right, and you know they don't, you know that they're not an addict, even though they're saying they're an addict, it is up to them to provide the medical documentation from their doctors that they are not a recreational users, but they're a dependent user. And it's one of those things that you can push back, then just saying, yep, I'm an addict is not enough. You now need medical, that employee now needs to provide medical documentation from either the family doctor or from somebody that you have referred them to, or the EAP program has referred them to. Because what so EAP is the Employee Assistance Program. So what you can do is you can send them to your EAP and have them have a counseling session with an addiction counselor, and that addiction counselor can make then a call that, yeah, this person is an addict, or this person is a recreational user, and taking that then a further step and that sort of thing. And so it's one of these things that unfortunately, it's messy, it's complicated. You have to do your investigation. And what I mean by investigation is you have to have a paper trail of what you did. If you don't have a paper trail of what you did, you didn't do it. And I can't stress that enough. So if you and I are having a conversation on what to do about this employee, and we've decided, and we implement our plan, but there's no documentation about our conversation, no email that that conversation happened, didn't happen. You have no proof that it happened. You only have eyewitness testimony. And it has been shown that eyewitness testimony is not the most reliable form of evidence, and documentation is. I'm not going to go into a huge range of duty to accommodate, because the Alberta government has done its job in providing you with a 62-page paper about everything of what is accommodating, what are the employer rights, what are the employees' rights, what are the physical, mental disabilities, how you can accommodate, what's undue hardship, and everything like that. Bona fide work. So I highly recommend that you read this document through, and you will have a much better understanding on duty to accommodate, way better than I can tell you in 5 minutes. So please read this document, and you will have a much better understanding on the duty to accommodate. The courts have been very clear that there's a different level of standard for non-safety sensitive role and safety sensitive roles. Now, I'm a psychic, and I feel that someone in the audience is asking, is there a list of what a safe sensitive role is? And the answer is no. Because just like just cause, there is no list that you can find of what qualifies as just cause. There's no such thing. There's no definition of just cause. That if you do these 5 things, that's just cause. What the court system wants is that you take it on a case-by-case basis, see what you have done in the past, what you want to do in the future, work that with that employee, and figure that out. So it's up to you to figure out what a safe, sensitive position is. Okay? Now, some of them are very clear-cut. Driving, if you're doing it for a living, is a safe, sensitive position. Okay? I would argue, and the courts have been very clear, if you have an office administrator, I like to pick on receptionists only because they're usually the most entry-level position in an organization. If a receptionist comes in impaired from cannabis versus a truck driver that comes in impaired in cannabis, the courts have been very clear you are to treat them differently. Because their impairment and their fallout of being impaired and the amount of damage and life of loss that they can cause is very different. And so this is one of the most frustrating things from the court system is we just want to go, just give us something that's like we can just have a checklist, like bang, 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 yep, I can fire you. And the court system says no. You have to make a reasonable judgment on what to do with that individual. And you have to take it case by case, yeah? That's so sweet. Yeah, I love your optimism, right? Shouldn't the people know they're in a safe, sensitive role? And the answer is, just from my own personal court experience, I had an employee hit another employee, which we fired, which we were challenged on, that it was too severe of a punishment to terminate the employee because they were a long-term employee. They had a perfect record, and this was a one-off. And the first thing that they ask us is, please provide us with a policy that says that you can't hit another person, right? Which is the workplace violence and harassment policy. But I'm like, are you kidding me, right? You want me to prove that we as a company have taught this person, which we had, by the way, that you can't hit another person. And so I like where you're going with it. So I highly recommend that in the job description, that you put in, this is a safe, sensitive role, and in the job ad, this is a safe, sensitive role. That's a beautiful strategy. Then to saying that this person was not aware that this was a safe, sensitive role, and you can pull up the ad and say, this person applied to this ad. Right there it says a safe, sensitive role, or they were provided this job description, and they signed off on it. And one of the things that I reckon with the employment offer, you also send the job description or a job ad or some way along those things that they were, and always put in, and other additional responsibilities as assigned. So you don't get the, oh, that's not part of my job description. You can say, well, you see that last line right there? That says that I can make you do anything and everything I want, yeah? Yeah. But there's no definition of safety. There's no legal definition, and it's up to you to figure out what the safety sensitive positions are, and having a list that these are safe sensitive positions, and these are not. right? And there's going to be black and white ones that are just obvious of that's a safe, sensitive position. And there's going to be ones that are like, we are not sure. And so that's going to be where the tricky part's going to be. And if you want to side on the side of caution, put them in that semi-sensitive role. And then, but what the court system wants, and it's been very clear, is you just can't have a broad brush that's like, you can't. Depending on their role, their standard of behavior and expectations can be judged. And this is a new development, because it used to be that you can't do random drug testing. And now that's been pushed back, saying if you can prove that your industry or your company has a drug and alcohol problem, that you're not doing this for the sake of, we just want to do this and we want to catch, but you have the basis and reasonable evidence that this is an issue in your organization. It's being pushed back. The city of Toronto was able to turn over the random drug testing because they were able to show that a majority of their drivers were coming into work impaired. And so this has now sort of been used as case law across Canada, saying that if you are able to prove that there's an issue in your organization or your industry, that random drug testing, and everyone knows about Suncor, which now has been sort of pushed back, where the court system said, I think you guys made a mistake when you said they couldn't. So why don't you guys revisit it and then come back to us one more time, right? So definitely this one, safety trumps human rights, safety trumps employment rights and everything like that. So this is where your safe, sensitive position, you have a lot of leverage on it, but it's up to you to define within reason what a safe, sensitive role is. And it's going to be hard to argue that every single position in your organization is safe, sensitive. Yeah. Wait. Sorry, I got to learn this.
What about not necessarily the safety of an organization, but the reputation and integrity of an organization? And I'm more thinking about, I'm an addictions counselor. So if it was an addictions facility, or if it was, like, let's say, a case management facility and like people working with the homeless, and your caseworker was coming to work smelling like marijuana, yep, you can really negatively impact the reputation of that organization, and consequently.
But I would argue that's a safe, sensitive position. Same thing with daycare and child. Yeah. So with another question I've been asked, well, what about childcare? What about a daycare? I would say absolutely. You don't want, little Johnny to be in their diapers for 5 hours because your daycare provider was impaired and forgot to look after their child or whatever it may be, right? This is why the court system said, we're not defining what safe, sensitive is, but it's up to you to be, then when you make that definition of that position, that you are able then to support it with evidence of why it's a safe, and working with vulnerable individuals, I would argue that absolutely that's a safe, sensitive position. And I would find it hard any reasonable judge to argue otherwise. That's a good part. Or unions. Well, unions argue against everything. Okay, any other questions as we... Okay, so safe, sensitive positions. With safe, sensitive positions, you are then able to do a little bit more because of the nature of that position. So one of the things, and I'm going to preface this with, it really depends on the doctor and how involved the doctor wants to be, and the motivation of the doctor. Because I've worked with doctors that are more than happy to work with the patient, and I've worked with doctors that said, you see this note is good enough, and I'm not doing any more work for you, or I'm not having any more discussions, I will not talk to you, right? And so it really depends on the doctors here as well. But one of the things that you can do is, are there alternatives? And that alternatives can also be about scheduling and dosing. Do they have to take this dosage? Do they have to take it first thing in the morning? Can they not take it at 3 a.m.? and then by the time they're ready to work, or can they not take it after work? What specific accommodations do I need to ensure that they're not doing? So is it just sort of driving or additional things? So you have a lot more. Like, can they come, you as a medical professional, this is their job, taking this medication, are they fit for duty? Are they able to do their job, right? Just because they are on medication doesn't mean that they can't function with their job. Here's what I recommend. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything until you get additional information. One thing that I have learned, unfortunately, is sometimes things work themselves out if you give it enough time. And what ends up happening, and specifically in terminations, everyone is heated up and people make rash decisions without enough evidence. So what I recommend is, if you're not sure what to do and you're uncomfortable with whatever you're doing, put them on leave, put them on paid leave, whether it be a week or two, because guess what? That 1 week paid leave, until you have enough information or definition, is going to pay itself tenfold going through the court systems or human rights violations or employer fees or employee morale or disruption to the workplace and that sort of thing, until you have figured it out. The other thing that I recommend with that is, if you're going to pull some of the duties from that individual, fill it with other duties from the individuals that you're giving it to. Because what ends up happening with morale and employee pushback is, here's employee X, we're going to take away 20%. Now you're at 80. We're going to give it to these people that are now at 105. You work at 80, these people work at 105, and now you got angry employees. So what you do is you pull the 20, 5, 5, 5, 5, and give the 20 back there and lessen their workload and increase theirs and make it equal. But what we tend to do is we tend to go, okay, well, we're going to pull this 50% because you can't do it, and we'll figure out how to make the other employees do it, and that really hurts morale. You can also ask for an independent medical exam as well, because it's a safe, sensitive position, right? So that you can have a second opinion. The problem with this is doctors usually, it's very political, they don't want to step on each other's toes, right? Very rarely, unless there's really gross negligence on one doctor's part, doctors usually don't want to overrule something. And I'll give you an example. I had an employee who unfortunately developed gangrene in their foot, and the doctor said that their only option is to cut off their foot. That's their only option. And they were on WCB. And the employee goes, I'm not cutting off my foot, I want a second opinion. And they went to another doctor, and the other doctor said, yeah, we can save your foot, but it's going to take a year or two and multiple surgeries, but we can save your foot. And those are rare, but I can guarantee you that employee would have gone to as many doctors as possible until one doctor said, we'll save your foot, right? And so it does happen when doctors do counter each other, or you see a specialist and that sort of thing, but very rarely will doctors on common diagnoses try to usurp each other, because it's a community as well, right? They know each other, they work with each other, and that sort of thing. You can ask what your length of disability is. So is this a temporary thing, or is this a chronic thing? Again, this is with safe sensitive. Prognosis of recovery, will they ever recover to where they don't have to use cannabis? Or will this be something that they will have to live with the rest of their lives? You can double check appointments and skipped appointments and absenteeism and verify the doctor's notes and things like that. And so if they're going to appointments and things like that, you can have an agreement with them saying that you can double check that not what was said, not what was discussed, any information that, but did Johnny go to his appointment this morning at 10 a.m.? And the same thing can happen with addiction and counseling sessions. The employee signs off on a piece of paper that says that, yeah, you can call in and you can check whether I'm making my appointments and whether I'm participating. And helping the process or just showing up there so I don't get fired. And so it's one of those things that you, again, but this kind of stuff takes time. And this is why what I implore you with this in the workplace is patience. But what people are is like, okay, you have until Wednesday, and if you don't give me the documentation that I want on Wednesday, you're fired. And companies have always gotten in trouble with that. Because what the duty to accommodate says that you need to show that there's financial risk to your organization, and the bigger you are, the harder it is to show undue hardship. Because the court doesn't say, well, if we accommodate this employee, instead of making 100 million, we'll make 900, 900,000, 99, and 80,000. So we can't do that. And the bigger you are, the harder it is to accommodate. So it is way easier if you're a company of 3, right? And so one of your people has an issue and you need to accommodate, it's 33% of your employee, and it's going to bankrupt your company because you're a small business of 3. You don't have to accommodate because it's undue hardship. But the larger your organization is, the harder that bar becomes. And the more flexibility there's in your organization and the various roles that occur. And one of the things the court system has absolutely said is, your counter argument can't be, if I do it for you, I'll have to do it for everyone. And the court system said, that's right. What you have to do is you have to take each employee's individual case by case and make a decision. Because it's been shown that when an employee asks to be taken off night shift because of family obligations, and you say, no, if I do it for you, everyone will have to be on night shift, they lost. And not because they didn't do it, because their first answer was no, and they did zero investigation because their counter argument was, if I do it for you, I'll have to do it for everyone. I'm not willing to do that. And that's why they lost. I highly recommend, how many of you know of this website? This is your best friend, okay? Write this down. This is the Canadian Legal Information Institute. Every single public case law that has ever occurred in Canada that has been made public access is in this database. You can go by province, you can go, and all you do is you type in whatever you want. I highlight typing in marijuana because it's still in the 80s, 90s, and even in the 2000s, and cannabis, and read up about terminations and processes about cannabis and in the workplace. Read 3 or 4 cases, and you will be an expert in what the courts require you to do. This is your best friend, okay? What we have learned from this is that, and these are on the slide sheets, is that zero tolerance policies can be upheld depending on the industry and how they're worded and implemented. That you can terminate somebody for breaching a policy rather than, and that you're terminating them for breaching a policy and not for their disability. That people required to disclose addiction before a violation, that you have to emphasize prevention and rehab if you're going to do that. If you fail to investigate, you'll always lose. That you're accommodating the disability, not the prescription, so don't focus on what they're taking, but what the effects are. That you can inquire about alternative treatments. That safe, sensitive positions in the court system are evolving, and it's a new thing, and it's a higher standard than before. The discipline must be proportional to the position, not to the, what word am I looking for the act of whatever they did, and that random drug testing can be upheld if you can prove that your industry or your company has a problem. And so these are all recent case laws, that this is all recently developing because of the legalization of cannabis coming in. Some of the policies that you might want to take a look at and update is duty to accommodate, because the number one thing that, do you have a policy on duty to accommodate? And here's my number one recommendation when I teach at the university is whenever you have a problem, we as professionals want to just jump in there and start doing our thing. the first thing that you want to do is, unfortunately, it's not very, what's the word? It's not very pleasant, but you want to go through your employee manual and go, do we have policies on this? And what do the policies says that I will do? Because what ends up happening is the first thing that the court system is going to ask is, show me your policies. And if you didn't follow your policies, you're going to lose. And so always check your policies first of what you're required to do, because you're going to lose when it says, well, you said you're going to investigate. You didn't investigate, or you have no proof on investigation. Therefore, we're going with the employee solely based on the fact that you didn't follow the policies that you said. This is why policies are a double-edged sword. They're great, but if you're doing policies for the sake of having policies and you're not following those policies, they are your crutch. Because the first thing that's going to happen is you didn't follow your policies, you're done. Prescription medication policy, or like that you have to have a prescription for the medication that you are taking, your drug and alcohol policy, and including cannabis in those drugs. Fit for duty, that you understand that in a safe, sensitive position, when you come into work, you are ready to work and not be impaired. Employee impairment, and this is another tip or recommendation. We have to stop using the word high or drunk or hungover, and we start using the word impaired, because it has a different connotation and it has a different way of starting a conversation. If I come to you and say, you know what, you're a little off today, I'm concerned you're impaired. Well, impairment might be lack of sleep. It might be that you took a bottle of NyQuil instead of DayQuil, and now you're a little bit drowsy. You might have diabetes and low blood sugar, rather than go, I think you're drunk. No, I'm not. Right? And so start using the word impairment rather than sort of saying, you know, I think you're drunk, I think you're high, I think you're hungover, I think you're sleepy, because you are automatically making a judgment on their behavior. And people love that, right? They love being judged on their behavior. Nothing ever goes wrong with that. A policy on how you're going to conduct investigations. And here's my tip to you. With all parties involved, when you're doing an investigation, get them a handwritten statement. If they're going to type it up, print it off and have them sign it. Because I have been bitten by somebody sending me a Word document that I printed. I have no date. I have no signature. I present it as, you gave me this. No, I didn't. Are you kidding me? Like I have it back home in my email from you, which I don't have it in court because I just assumed that you would be honest with me. And so always have, like if somebody prints you off something, make sure it's handwritten and dated. Ideally, it's always a spectrum, right? It's always a spectrum. But like if you want ironclad, handwritten, because I've also had like handwritten and signature, and the person says, yeah, my manager wrote that for me and said to sign it. And so I did. But you use the word I in it. So what you're saying is the manager put I. Anyways, I don't want to get into it. Highly recommend just you get a statement from everyone and have it handwritten. The other thing, when you're doing interviews, everyone has a recording device. In Canada, it is not illegal to record a conversation as long as one party in the conversation is aware that the conversation is being recorded. Okay? Now, whether it's going to be allowed in court is a whole different thing, right? So that's where it's like, it's not an illegal act. So what you can do, which I don't recommend, but if you're doing an investigation, you can secretly record yourself to write better notes. But what I would recommend is we're doing an investigation. You have your phone. There's a voice memo. You put in the voice memo and what you start. Can you participate with me? Okay. So what you would do is you would do your, sorry, I just did my screenshot instead of a voice memo. Now I just lowered my screen resolution. Okay, this is why I do not voice memo. So what I would do is, what's today's date? 17th. Hi, this is Adam Chernetsky. It's May 17th at 10:55. I am with employee A. We're doing an investigation on an incident that occurred today. May I record this conversation? And just for the record, can you say your full, don't say your full name, but say your makeup name. Can you state your name? And I have permission to record this conversation? Thank you. And then continue on. And so now you have sort of proof, because what you don't want to do is, can I record this conversation? Great. All right, let's start. You have no proof that you got permission to record the conversation. So first ask, can I record this conversation? Yes. Then start recording and then ask for permission again to record this conversation. Now be aware, they have right and access to that conversation because they're on it and they are aware. There shouldn't be anything preventing you from giving that conversation to them, but they don't have the right to all of the investigation because it's a privacy violation of the statements and everything like that. So they have the right for a summary of the investigation, and they have a right to anything that they produced themselves because they produced it, such as also the recording, because if they want to have a record of it, so be it. You have nothing to hide. And what I have also found is it keeps me more honest because I know I'm being recorded. So I'm very careful with my language and and then you have proof how professional or the tone that the investigation was recorded on. And so in my personal opinion, I think it's a very positive tool if it's presented in that way. If somebody says, why do you want to record me? Well, I want to have a record of our conversation, and it's just as much for your protection as it is for my protection, so that I'll give you this copy if you want. Thus far, I have never had anyone ask me for a copy, right? But I'm sure there's going to be one. It's like, here you go. But there's nothing to hide that, right? And that sort of thing. So, and then having a termination policy or a discipline policy of what you're going to do, what steps you're going to have. Because if you're going to say you're going to suspend the person and you've never suspended that person, you're going to get in trouble. Now, the other thing is it depends on the situation, right? So accommodation can talk about reassigning, rearranging duties, removing them from safe, sensitive duties until such time, allow for longer breaks. So I had an employee that said, well, I need extra 15-minute breaks on top of my regular 15-minute breaks, so they wanted half-hour breaks. I said, no problem. What you can do is punch out so that you're not paid for the extra breaks, and you can work longer shifts. And I would also like a doctor's note that you need additional extra half-hour breaks. The employee quit the next day, right? So it's one of these things that just because somebody's asking for accommodation, no problem, but provide me with proof other than your verbal word that you need these accommodations based on medical, physical, mental disability provided by your doctors and support and that sort of thing. Prescriptions, with policies that you have a disclosure clause that you must disclose a prescription if it causes impairment, and that you will accommodate, that you are able to ask for the side effects. You don't ask for what the actual prescription is. You can't do that because you can reverse engineer what they have, and that's a privacy violation. So you're not asking for their prescription, you're asking for the side effects and schedules and that sort of thing. Fit for duty, again, in your policy, a disclosure for impairment, education about impairment. This should be part of your orientations. A genuine concern that really then coming into work impaired because of a safe sense position puts people at peril, and that should really be part of your orientation. You are in a safe, sensitive role. How did that employee know they were in a sensitive role? In their orientation, we went through a video or through a thing that their position was safe, sensitive, and they cannot come into work impaired. There's also a suspicion of impairment training that and there's a number of companies that do this. You can do it online or have an in-class like this. And it's recommended that supervisors, your frontline managers, do this kind of training, and it recognizes, slurring, runny, watery eyes or red eyes, and that sort of thing. So there's can be also impairment training for your frontline managers. terminations. The court has been very clear. You can't just fire somebody because you're frustrated. And believe me, it's never the pro-star employee that comes in and says, you know what, I need a little bit of accommodation because of this. Can we talk about it? 9 times out of 10, the management's like, yeah, you are amazing. We don't want to lose you. It's your low-performing employee that has attendance issues, that has personality issues, that creates drama in your workplace. You're about to fire them, and they go, prescription, not well. Doctor said, so I'm okay, can't touch me. And that adds a level of frustration that you really have to take a step back. And one of the things that I tell people is this. Sometimes people feel that, look, I'm competent, my head's together, my life is together, I have a good family relationship, I have a great work relationship, I have a good work-life balance, and it seems society is stacking against me, and it only protects the weak, the meek, and the people with social and mental issues. That's not fair. And that's the expression, or that's the opinion of your high-performing employees that get frustrated and the morale goes down. And no one ever chooses to have a mental illness. No one ever chooses to have personal, financial issues. And I ask the people, what would you prefer? Would you prefer for you to have mental issues, psychological issues, physical disabilities, that you can't get your life together, and then get a little bit of a break from society? Or would you prefer to be competent, well-paid, have a good life, have a good income, and deal with a little bit of inconvenience from people that are less competent than you? You choose. I've yet to have a competent person go, oh no, let me take a mental disability or a physical disability, right? And so it's one of these things, the people that are causing you issues, you can argue that, yes, because of the life choices they have chosen through life, they're in that situation because of their choices, but they weren't like, how can I make my life more miserable and complicated? I know, I'll start an addiction. I know, I'll get into a nasty relationship because my life's not complicated enough, right? And you have to really take a step back and realign yourself that competence comes with a burden. And unfortunately, some people are not competent with dealing with their life, dealing with their issues, and dealing with work. And we are the balance between what employers and societies sometimes become trigger happy on, the choices that an employee has made, and we play the line on the reasonable and rational of, let's give this person a chance. Because the problem is, if you don't help that person and they lose their job, they're going to end up dead or in the system and worse ever off than they can under the care of the employer, at least providing some kind of support. Because if you fire them, no one else will hire them. And their addiction and mental issues will go unchecked and will get lessened or worsened. At least as an employer, you have the resources to at least try to help them. And here's the key. They need to want help. They need to want to participate in the program that you are creating and helping. Because if they go, nope, not participating, no helping, you've done your due diligence. You've said, okay, we have this accommodation for you. We have this ability to provide alternative duties. There was a person that lost because they claimed physical disability, but the company offered them 4 positions that they turned down. And then they said, well, no, I don't want those positions. And they lost because the company was willing to accommodate, the person didn't want to participate. So your sort of pushback is you need to want to, so I need less time, no problem. We can have you work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Oh, no, that doesn't work for me. I'd like Monday or Friday off, so at least I have a 3-day long weekend. Yeah, that's not going to work for us because Fridays and Mondays are our busiest. well, I don't want that accommodation then. You're willing to accommodate. They don't get to choose their accommodations to a certain degree. They get to choose of what I need to have accommodated, and they need to participate. And what I have found is your A players, your pro stars are going to go, I just want to work. I just want to do my job. But what we get stuck on is that small percentage of 5-10% of the people that want to gauge the system or game the system, that want to do nothing but have a free ride. And we tend to then assume everyone wants to do that, and they don't. But it really becomes really frustrating when you have that person have a sort of ace in the hole, and because you know they're a low-performing employee already. And but put yourself in that shoes. You know you're about to get fired, and you have no control over being fired. Would you not do everything in your power to try to keep your job? You would. You wouldn't go, I deserve this. Yeah. No, I really made a big mess of my life in high school, and I really should have went into university or taken that job that I didn't. I deserve to get fired. Go ahead. No one thinks that. You would fight tooth and nail for your job, and so they are also doing that. Just try to put yourself in their shoes from time to time. They're trying to survive. Documentation. If it didn't happen, if it wasn't written down, didn't happen. So have a conversation, follow up with an email, follow up with a text. Texts used to not be allowed in court because there were new technology. Texts are now being, guess what? Somebody won with an emoji. Because what ended up happening, this was a case law of saying, hey, are we okay to go with this contract? Person sent back a thumbs up. They went through with the contract. And the person said, I didn't agree to anything. You sent me a thumbs up. We went to court. And the judge ruled, yeah, thumbs up, it's okay, agreement. That, 15 years ago, would have been laughable, right? But an emoji won. So this is evolving. Text messages used to not be admissible in court because there was no central server for the backup. It's only point to point. But it's a piece of evidence. And it's up to the judge themselves whether they were going to make it admissible in court. So take a screenshot, send it to yourself or whatever it may be. Any kind of documentation and proof. So I have a long conversation with somebody over the phone. I will follow up with an email saying, as per our conversation, we talked about these 4 points. I now have a record. Well, again, everything's a spectrum. Ideally, you want signed signature and things like that. So the other thing is, here's my trick for people refusing to sign disciplinary warnings. Somebody says, I'm not signing that. It's like, no problem. Can you sign that you're refusing to sign? Just say, I refuse to sign and sign that. Sure, absolutely. Okay, now you have a signature that they saw that piece of document and they're disagreeing with it. And one of the things that you're trying to prove to that person is you're not showing guilt by signing this. You're showing that you and I have discussed this. Right? And so ideally, yes, you want to have a response. Hey, can you respond back that you received this email, that you read that email? But then it's like, oh, they're trying to get me, right? And that sort of thing. But some piece of evidence is better than no piece. And everything's a spectrum. So handwritten on beautiful blue ink signature and the whole thing, way better than an electronic print that says that they've read that policy. But that electronic date stamp that says they've read that policy is way better than nothing. Because you have proof that they've read that policy with a date stamp. You solve a problem with time and patience and everyone talking in a room. What ends up happening is that you talk, I talk to you, I talk to you, I talk to you, and I talk to you, and then I make a decision. A way better strategy is getting everyone in a room. Let's talk about this. Let's brainstorm this. Let's try to figure out alternatives, because it has been shown that 5 people coming up with a solution, usually the solution is better than one person, because everyone's coming in from a different perspective. And this happens all the time, and I get very frustrated I'm working with a problem, and we're talking in as a group, and somebody comes with a pure and simple and beautiful solution, and you're going, why didn't I think of that? Right? It's so much better than my whole kludgy colluded idea that I had. Get people in a room and talking, and you will have a much better strategy going forward. Listen to the other side. Reach out to your networks. Don't be afraid of calling a professional and like a peer in an organization. This is why we have network meetings, saying, hey, I have this issue. Can you, have you ever, this is what I think I'm about to do, because that person will put at least a little bit more reason and rationality and patience into you, rather than, oh yeah, totally fire that guy, right? They're going to be, okay, let's take a step back. I think you're a little bit emotionally attached to that. And patience, 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 okay? Things tend to sometimes work out in themselves, but giving yourself a little bit of time and breathing room and sleeping on it does actually sometimes work. All right? So your plan is this. Look at your policies and update them as needed and implement them and send it out to your organization however you see fit in order for ensuring that anyone is there. Address recreational cannabis as just like alcohol. Improve your hiring and onboarding processes by having a cannabis education piece in there that it's not, it is like alcohol. That you have a requirement for disclosing dependency, that you can ask for, or for people to let you know about dosage changes, requirement for medical prescriptions, that you can ask about scheduling and amounts for safe sensitive positions, that you have a fit for duty and education, that people understand what is safe, sensitive, or not, that you have impairment training for supervisors, other tools and checklists and support, and that you can utilize your assistance EAP program in order to help you with, like, you're paying for this. So call them and say, I have this issue. What kind of tools and support do you have for me to help with this employee? And pay for it. We have a question.
This is coming from Okotoks. Can we as employers ask if a new hire is a cannabis user, if this is a safety sensitive role?
Well, that's the same thing as asking, do you use alcohol? So a better question is, can you come into work fit for duty, right? And this is the fit for duty. And fit for duty then means that you haven't taken cannabis or alcohol or medication in the last 24 hours and you're not coming into work impaired. That is a way better question than, are you a cannabis user? Do you use crack, cocaine, heroin, right? Because again, you are making a judgment and you're starting off on the wrong foot. Are you typing all of this down to the chat? Oh no, right. Sorry, technology, it's an amazing thing. Right?
All right. And then the second part of it, do they have to disclose if you do ask those questions that you just asked? Do they have to disclose and tell you?
So it depends. Because the answer is no, they don't. Well, the answer is you have to really be able to prove that that is a effective means of. So let's turn this around. A way better one is a way better way of addressing this and sort of side skirting the direct question. I feel like a politician right now. Is that, are you aware that this is a safe, sensitive position and that you cannot come into work impaired? Coming into work impaired means not sleeping enough, taking prescription medication, cannabis use, alcohol use, drug or illicit, that you cannot come into work impaired. Do you understand that? And that if you do come into work, you can be terminated. Do you understand that? Is a way better way of doing that than saying that, did you know, are you a drug user? Because if you are, we're not hiring you. Because that can get you into so a person says, I'm not, but I used to be. So what are you going to do with that? They were just honest. And now you have, well, once a drug user, always a drug user, they're going to relapse. So they were honest with it. And what I find is most candidates that have dependencies are not going to be honest with you to begin with. And so it's really more of a education portion of it. And then if you're asking those questions and it's an issue, you already should have a pre-employment screening in that if that's an issue. My question is, if it's legalized, why, like you're not asking, do you drink alcohol? You're not asking that question. That's what you're asking with, are you a cannabis user? So again, whenever you're asking about a cannabis question, rephrase it and ask it with alcohol, and then say, well, I wouldn't ask it for alcohol, so why am I, and that's where that stigma comes in. Yeah. Well, it depends. What? Saliva, urine, blood, and that sort of thing. So that question becomes, well, okay, so they have cannabis in their system. It's a legal substance, just like alcohol. Depends on the level and that sort of thing, right? So, and can you do pre-employment testing? The answer is yes, but you have to be, you can't just randomly go, well, I have a lot of office staff, we're going to do random drug testing, or you can't prove that that is an effective means of preventing the use of alcohol. So in order to do that, you need to establish precedents and reason of why you're having pre-employment drug testing. Yes, Chris.
Why is medical cannabis required to be disclosed, but someone with other medications, for other medication use, including opioids, are not required to disclose?
Well, technically, they're not required to disclose it, but since it's a prescription and it's new, they still have to disclose that they're taking a prescription. So you, the same thing that you would never, and if that's the impression I gave, I'm sorry, but I just assume that I'm taking medical cannabis is going to come up in some kind of conversation of it. But ultimately, you're not allowed to say, what prescription are you using? Because you can reverse engineer whatever they're taking, right?
So this is what you said earlier about the idea of what the side effects are and how that you're going to have to accommodate around it on that side.
Correct.
This is when you fall into adding in the cannabis to your legal drug and alcohol policies to make sure everything sort of flows together with.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, and I apologize if I gave that you can ask, like, is it medical cannabis? I'm just assuming that conversation is going to come out of just like somebody's going to say, well, I'm taking an opioid. They're not going to say which opioid, but they're going to take the class of drug that that's going to come up in some kind of conversation. Yeah. Right. And here's the
Adam, can you read the question first?
Sure. So if you don't have the financial economic resources to pay for your employee to go to counseling and support and that sort of thing, that's your undue hardship. However, you truly have to show that it puts a big dent into your financial means of, not that, well, if we do it for you, we'll have to do it for everyone. And so it's one of those things. Undue hardship is very difficult to prove on a multi-million, billion-dollar profitable company. For smaller businesses, that line is not that difficult to establish, or not as difficult to establish. But one of the things that you can do is you can reach out to a whole bunch of non-for-profits that deal with addiction. Alberta Human Rights, there's a lot of government agencies that will be able to provide you with information on the employer side to help you, at least provide you with some resources and reading materials of what you can do. And you might be able to refer them to a non-for-profit addiction counseling and that sort of thing without actually having to go through the EAP program. Does such a thing exist, like a non-for-profit addiction where people don't have to pay for it? Okay. So those things exist. I just assumed they would. Any other questions? So, yeah.
If this one might be very, very specific, but we'll see if we can get an answer for it here. If a person is staying in a shelter and they have a medical cannabis, would the shelter legally have to accommodate them by A? Hold on one second, a message came up on the board here. By A.
So they have a medical prescription for cannabis.
Yep, and they're staying in a shelter, and they want to know, does the shelter have to accommodate them by A, allowing them to have cannabis in the facility, and ingesting cannabis in the facility?
So ingesting cannabis in the facility, it would be the same. And again, this is the stigma. The question is, if an employee has Tylenol 3s, and they, do I have to accommodate, can they have Tylenol 3s on them? And can I allow them to take Tylenol 3s in their shelter? What's your answer to that? Yes. The answer is yes. So, yeah. Okay. Perfect. So much better answer than mine.
Hold on one second. Can you say it again?
No, but you wouldn't kick that. It's a you wouldn't kick that employee. You wouldn't kick out that client for having a prescription. They would check it at the door.
But I would say, yeah.
But it depends.
In a shelter, it's likely that it would fall under the medication policy, and it would be checked at the door on intake and treated as any other medication, and doled out under that prescription. So whatever is written by the doctor under the frequency of use and whatnot, and it wouldn't be varied.
And however, I agree with you that they're not an employee, so that accommodation wouldn't be there, but you would have policies in place on how to deal with prescription.
But it also depends on the program, though. I would think that it would get really complicated if the program doesn't allow mood-altering substances in that program.
Absolutely.
True, recreational versus a prescription.
But again, recreational, there's zero accommodation. Like what you have to understand is recreational cannabis. It's like, can I bring in this beer? No, you cannot bring in this beer. Why not? It's legal, right? And so again, like think of recreational as beer, right? And think of like medical cannabis as Tylenol 3s or any kind of prescription. And then whenever you're talking about cannabis, replace recreational with alcohol. And how would you do it? And whenever you're talking medical, replace cannabis with Tylenol 3s or whatever it may be. And it helps you kind of realign the question a little bit better. All right, we have, So any more questions? All right. I don't know how to do this right now. So let's take a 5-minute break, just to, or 7-minute break, to give people just, and we'll do quickly the case study, and then we'll leave 15 minutes for about Q&A, and then we'll finish up. So if we can be back at 11:30. Now, before you leave, I know I said 11:30. That doesn't mean walking through the door at 11:30. That means we're starting at 11:30. Okay, but make sure you leave your seats for at least 5 minutes, walk around, stretch your legs, and that sort of thing, and we're almost done. In your groups here, I just want to give you about 10 minutes to look over this policy. I specifically have taken out the judges. See, I'm not, I was going to say, I'm not even doing anything. Possessed. I specifically taken out the judge's recommendation. So what's happening in this case study is that the arbitrator here is deciding whether the employee has enough of a grievance to actually go into the court system and be successful. Okay? And so what I'd like you to do is, after reading it in your groups of tables, will be the easiest, to discuss amongst yourself, was the termination appropriate? Why or why not? And then what improvements could the employer have taken in the future, or what improvements can the employer do in the future to avoid actually having end up being in arbitration? Then we'll have a discussion, and I will not tell you what the judge said or what the arbitrator said, you will have to go to the website and look up yourself if you're really curious, because what that ends up going to be is, at least you'll go visit the website, and you through procrastination, at least you will do it once and know how to use the website. Okay? So go ahead, you are in your groups, read the case study, and then discuss why, do you think that the termination was appropriate by the employer, and what could have the employer done better? And then I'm going to just give you about 10 minutes or so. We'll quickly discuss it, and then we'll go into Q&A, and then we'll end. So just a quick sort of hands up. Who thinks, so the judge, and I realized after, so the arbitrator said, does the employee have a strong enough case that they were terminated for their disability of using cannabis? Or does the employee or ex-employee not have enough, and that the employer was just in terminating their employment? That's sort of what the judge or what the arbitrator had to decide. So was there enough evidence to terminate or not, and was it appropriate? And if it went to court, would the employee be successful in showing that it was sort of due diligence, or that they were discriminating against? So on the hands up, how many of you think that the employee has enough evidence and support to show that they were wrongfully dismissed? Okay. Those of you who feel that they don't have enough evidence to show that they were wrongfully dismissed. One low soul? One? Well, some of you might be shocked about the answer to that, okay? But you will have to go up to the website, look it up yourself, and just guess what? Scroll down, all the way down, and you'll get the judgment. Yeah, so the title is right up there. If you actually just Google the title, you will end up on that website anyways. So one of the things that, the reason why I show you this is the employer did a whole bunch of things wrong. Like, it is it is shocking how bad the employer handled that situation. But even though the employer handled that situation so poorly, there's also onus on the employee to provide the medical support and the cooperation. And that's where you'll find it kind of surprising, is that employee, the documentation and they provided after the fact of everything, not before. Had the employee provided the information before all of this going down, would have been a lot more successful. Now, that being said, arbitrators and judges are human beings. And what I have found is, depending on the time of day, depending on the personality, ask any lawyer that does litigation in court, and they can tell you that judges have personalities and that they are reasonably predictable in which way they go on judgments based on past decisions. So the lawyer already goes in, it's like, well, if I get this judge, we might have a chance. If I get this judge, we have no chance, right? And so it's one of these things that it all depends not only on your circumstances, but on the day that you end up in court, right? And this is what makes it incredibly frustrating. So so I will leave that to you there. There's a couple of online questions that I want to address first, and then we will put it up to, don't start packing up yet. This is the group participation portion, and then there's surveys to fill out and a whole bunch of things before you can leave. So you can't leave until you fill out the survey. And have the media release form filled out and give it to the bouncer at the door. So, Chris, you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, a couple of questions here from online. First of all, do businesses need to, or are recommended to, increase insurance to cover liabilities because of cannabis?
Okay. I am not an insurance broker, And so therefore, I highly recommend you speak with your insurance company on this. My answer to this is, again, it's like alcohol. Should we increase, like there is, in my personal opinion, there isn't going to be an like Colorado is not burning. Like they're functioning. They're actually generating revenue dollars. Yes, there has been increase in accidents using alcohol and cannabis. However, the jury is still out whether it's now being more reported because it's cannabis, and whether those level of accidents have always been there and they just focus on the alcohol because that was what was easily prosecutable and tested. So the jury is still out there. Yes, there has been an increase. However, there's also been a decrease in opioid usage, right? And so I'm not going to tell you what premiums you should increase or decrease and that sort of thing. What I'm saying is the world is not going to start burning and pure chaos and anarchy is not going to happen. We're going to have a couple of incidences, just like I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but driverless vehicles. Recently in the news, there was an accident with a driverless vehicle that injured a pedestrian, but you didn't hear about the 100,000 injuries that occurred with actual drivers hitting pedestrians, right? And it's one of these things, because it's so new, we tend to sort of focus. It's already happening. People are already using. They're going to continue to use it before. This is not, there's going to be a few very dumb people. They're going to think it's their rights, and it's your responsibility to educate them before they make a critical error. Next question.
Based on all you talked about today, what would be the first step you would recommend to an employer that they should take, that they should do or to take to prepare for the legalization of cannabis?
Look at your drug and alcohol policy and add cannabis in there. Done. Or take a step further and add prescription, non-prescription, and to disclose dependency. Would be like, look at your drug and alcohol, stick it in cannabis in there, that it's not allowed along with illicit drugs, and that people have to disclose their dependencies, and that you will provide duty to accommodate to do that, and 80% of your work is done. Now take that policy, send it out company-wide, have people initial, sign it, electronic date stamp, put it into your orientation, and you're 80% there. Question, and then okay. Second question.
Hold on a sec. Who's got first?
We'll go closer. Sorry.
What's the difference between dependency and addiction? And because do you have to disclose that you have an addiction versus disclosing you have a dependency? Like, I'm just a little bit confused on that.
So I would have to look at the Webster dictionary, but if I'm using it interchangeably, I'm assuming it's the same in my. I am using it interchangeably. I'm not differentiating between dependency and addiction.
Hold on one second.
Diagnosis, which is like any medical conditions or are diagnosed with the diagnostic.
It's the Bible of everything, but I was using it in dependency and addiction. For me, I was in this seminar for clarity. I was using interchangeably.
So they are the same as what she's saying. Okay.
I have a prescription for Tylenol 3s that I take to manage my pain. I don't necessarily think I'm an addict, but I have I'm dependent on that to manage my pain. So are you looking at those two things as someone who takes a prescription, are they that they're dependent on, is that an addiction? I would say
then
no.
The way you're saying it is no. And I am going to be a lot more clearer in my future presentations on that. I see how we're not splitting hairs, but I can completely understand that for me in this presentation, whenever I use dependency, I meant it as an addiction. But if you're dependent on it and you're taking off it, that's still accommodation. Regardless whether it's a dependency or addiction, you're still accommodating that because you have to take it. The only difference with the addiction is you want help to be off it. That's a good, tough question.
My question's not nearly as good now. You keep saying date stamp. So if I send an all-staff email that shows everyone's email, not
Okay, so better than nothing.
okay.
Here's what I recommend. Here's a quick hack. SurveyMonkey or any kind of survey that you send out, and your questionnaire is 2 questions. Your name and that you, what's your name? Or 1 question. First name, last name, and hit submit that you've read it. You now have a date stamp that they have to actually enter something and hit submit that they've read the policy. So I use this in, we've used this in Google Drive, where we create a form of a questionnaire, which is the policy. We send it out because what the counter argument is, I never received that email. I lost that email. I don't remember that email, right? It's way better than nothing, but it's way better to have confirmation that that person did something with it. And so my recommendation would be to use something like SurveyMonkey or Google Drive as a questionnaire with, here's the new policy. I, Adam Chernetsky, have read this policy. You put in Adam Chernetsky, hit submit, and now you have a date stamp of that person typing in their name and then saying, well, I never did that. And so you're going to say, so what's the probability that I have 27 staff that did this, including you, or I have 26 staff and then I did this magically by myself and that sort of thing, right? So a date stamp is better than nothing, and it's becoming more and more accepted by the courts. Ideally, what you would want, especially, you don't want, like I have some companies that have the employee initial every single page of the policy manual, and that for me is overkill. What you want is key critical policies that you want that initial signature or date stamp or on it. You don't need it for everything. So your termination, your drug and alcohol, workplace violence and harassment, those are the key critical things. Look at your past history. What have you terminated people for in the past? And those are the policies that you should have signatures on. Because what I'm experiencing now is the first thing that employment standards is asking is show me the policy and show me that they have read the policy. And a quick cheat on that is ensuring that they initial the policy during their orientation, or part of that process is initially during the onboarding process, that those elements are part of the onboarding. That's a good question. You should follow up, or no? Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, one here online. In terms of workplace drug testing and medicinal cannabis use, if a worker is prescribed and has THC in their system, but let's say that they only dose outside of work hours, so the drug test shows cannabis in their system, can the employer discipline an employee for this if it is prescribed and not during work hours?
So the question doesn't matter when they're taking it, it's how impaired are they coming into work, right? And so the thing is, just because, well, you can't, again, I'm going to turn this around into changing cannabis to beer, just like, and then to T3. So I'm taking T3 outside of my working hours, but I'm coming into work impaired. That's still an issue, regardless of when I'm taking the drug. The same thing. I had a bender, and I had a whole bunch of alcohol, and I'm coming into work drunk or hungover. Still doesn't matter. It's like I know I'm not there, but I didn't drink during company hours, so you can't discipline me. That, in my opinion, is the same kind of question that's being asked. And so what you're focusing on, again, is what they're using rather than how they're coming into work. And that's something that we really need to change around. It's not what you're doing, it's how you're coming into work and how it's affecting your work, and if it's a safe, sensitive position or not. And that THC level, for me, it's an arbitrary question of when they're actually taking it. But it's a really good question, because it just shows that we really need to, that's where that stigma, where I think people really need to die in order for that stigma of cannabis to be lifted, because it is seen such as a negative connotation. So if you don't have any more questions, if anything comes up, please feel free to reach out to the email that you were given to this seminar. Chris will be more happy than to forward it on to me and so on and so forth. And thank you for your time.